Dobre. My language is Dobre.
I come from Eastern Europe too, and I'll maybe say a few things about that later on. Also, I acknowledge the traditional territory of the First Nations people of this area. It's important that we recall and remember the knowledge and traditions of our elders, because they did live sustainably on the land. And some people in this audience still know how to do that. And that's something all of us have to go back to. My family comes from a small village in the Tatra Mountains of southern Poland, and they have lived sustainably, and now the Western world is moving in and taking over. And their traditions, their economy, their way of life, and I guarantee their landscape will begin to suffer. And this is the challenge that we face. And I will weave this story in as I speak to you. But my main mission is to tell you a little bit about climate change, what it is, the nature of what's coming in the future, the kinds of impacts it's going to have, and then what we can do about it. And my focus is going to be us as individuals and our communities, and how we can adapt. And I hope I can do it in the time allotted. And whoever's going to keep track of me, give me a 5-minute warning, please. So, it's all about the fact that climate change is happening. A certain amount is going to happen, and there's nothing we can do about that now. The time is past where we can reverse it or bring it back to the way it was even 50 years ago. It's impossible. And the words of Rob McRae identified that for us. So yes, we have to do emissions, but we have to prepare for the changes that are ahead, and they provide us an opportunity, unlike ever in the history of humanity, to finally live in large numbers in a sustainable way with all the other creatures on Earth. And one of the important things, perhaps you can walk out of here, is that we have to give not only other people, make sure that they have a fair vote, not just the people who have money, but we have to ensure that every creature, every other species there has a vote in the future of this planet. How we do that yet, I do not know. But I bet you if they voted that certain people who are in control of our province, our country, and in fact the world would not any longer be in control. And it's not about control. It's about integration and living together. And that's a key message. If you want to read more about that from a very unusual source, read the book called Harmony by Prince Charles. Prince Charles was thinking and talking about sustainability and how to live together with everything else on Earth since he was a teenager, if you can imagine this. We just don't know. A very fine mind. If you get a chance, read the book. Anyway, it's my time to get on here. And let's see. Now, where do I point it? At you? Okay. Maybe it's this button. Okay. I'll figure it out. You've already seen some quotes. Here's another one just a week ago. Time is not on our side. Leaders must act, and so must we. The good news is we as individuals are. The sad news is many of our leaders are not. The world is warming. There's no question about it. A certain amount of warming has already taken place. We heard the number 0.8 degrees Celsius. That's sort of the average warming for the entire Earth. Northern environments, such as the Arctic, northern Canada, northern Asia, have warmed much more, up to 2.3 degrees Celsius already. These are enormous amounts of warming. They may not sound like much, but they already are having profound changes. Follow the temperature curve. It does not lie. We measure temperature very well in many places on Earth. The temperature has gone up. Some of you may have been around in 1920, perhaps not, but there are people who are. The temperature since that time has gone up a great deal. The world is really no longer the place it was of our grandfathers in terms of its climatic conditions. That's measured, it's a fact. British Columbia has warmed. If we look at winter temperatures, if we take a look at winter temperatures, the winter temperatures in northern British Columbia since the 1900s have increased by as much as 3.5 degrees Celsius. That's a huge amount of temperature change. And that's because winters are warming more than the summers are. But the summers are warming as well. And most of the warming is taking place in the north because that's where it's coolest. So that's where all the energy that's being generated in the atmosphere is going first, where it is coolest, where the difference is the greatest. If you take a look at extremes, how our sort of distribution of conditions is shifting out of the normal range. The normal range you see is here, 1951 to 1980. We are now 2011 to 2013. We have shifted the distribution of temperatures, in this case land summer temperatures, and increased the occurrence of extremes. And if you look there, you can see at the far right end of that diagram more of the dark red. Before extremes, what we called extremes were very rare, 0.1% of the time. Now, they're 14.1% of the time now already. Extreme temperatures. And then if we take a look at the bottom, which is looking at winter temperatures are 2.8% increased extreme. So these changes have taken place already. We don't need to talk about the middle, we talk about the edges, because the edges is where the action is, where the indication of change are. Why carbon dioxide? Carbon dioxide has gone up inexorably over the last century, but here you can see since 1960, 320 parts per million, crossed 402 parts per million this year. 402 parts per million. 40% higher than it has been in 1800s. We have changed a critical element of the global atmosphere by 40% through our activity. It's inconceivable that just a few of us, we think of ourselves, how can I change something as major as the atmosphere by as much as 40%? And we're going to change it a great deal more. 28% of the rise has happened in the last 11 years, long after we knew that this is an issue. 28% of the change of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is a consequence of what we've done in 11 years. I started to talk about this challenge of climate change in the early 1990s, as you saw James Hansen in the 1980s. Yet, what we have done, not much. Consequences. People looked at, is anything happening as a consequence of these changing amounts of carbon dioxide and increasing temperatures? You put more energy into the atmosphere gets more active. A more active atmosphere holds more water and has more wind. The storms are stronger. Here we can see a German insurance company, Munich Re, looks at natural earth disasters versus climate-related disasters, and everything about that red at the bottom is going up. It is unambiguous. We are affecting the entire global climate system. 2013, Viktor Orban, the Prime Minister of Hungary, we are facing the worst floods of all time because of the flooding of the Danube. I was on the Danube on the floods of 2005, and they were amazing then. Much worse, southern Germany. Never happened. 500 years, huge changes. Extreme temperatures. These are temperatures, dark red, 105 degrees Fahrenheit, which I don't even know what that is in Celsius, but it's an awful lot of them. The US, burning, literally. These are temperatures that are not sustainable for long periods of time for people to live in. They obviously have huge impacts. And as the temperatures change, other things change. This is the US Drought Monitor, April 29th, 2014, and I've looked even more recently, and everything that's dark, D4, exceptional drought now in California, virtually the entire province is an exceptional drought. Where is the water going to come for them? They're already ripping out their agricultural system, and you know what that means for us. It means that the food that we depend on that comes from there is not going to be able to come from there, or it's going to cost us more money. Arctic sea ice has declined by 50% since we began measuring it. And I'll talk more about that, but the Arctic sea ice helps generate cold air, which influences the way our global climate system works through the jet stream. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that. The surface of Greenland, which up until recently was sort of melting, the red is the melting. In 2012, 98% of the surface of the Greenland ice sheet was melting. Now, melting is one sign. But the other thing is that as it melts, there's heat transferred into the ice mass below, so that the ice below is warming and getting closer to melting as well. So once that process starts, it's very difficult to turn it around. Like a big train going down a railway track, you just can't stop it and go backwards. People are very concerned about that because this is going to raise water levels more than the 1 meter we're all thinking that sea levels around the world. 2 meters, 3 meters. So many of our communities around the world are below that mark. How will they deal with this great challenge? In British Columbia, our glaciers are melting, another sign that the temperatures are rising. 25% in Alberta have reduced, there's been a 25% reduction in size of glaciers in Alberta, 10%, 11%, up until the year 2005, and believe me, I work in the north, I see glaciers, they're all continuing to melt, and even more profoundly than they have until this time. New lakes are appearing, new land is appearing, valleys that were filled with ice are now open valleys. Where's the energy going? It was mentioned just a moment ago that energy actually isn't warming the land. If you take a look at that picture there, you'll see right at the bottom, you can't even see it, the amount that's warming the land and the atmosphere is very small. All that extra energy is going into the ocean. It's going in there and being stored, but the ocean will hold water and radiate it back later. So we will continue to warm. It's not just the atmosphere, not the land we stand on. It's actually we are changing the temperature of the entire ocean as well as changing the composition of the atmosphere. Food. A week ago today, all aspects of food security are potentially affected by climate change. Food production, access, fair access to people, use, and price stability. There is no escape from this. The food price index has gone up in particular since about 2003 and gone up. Look at this folly of the ethanol spike where we will grow more corn to drive cars than we will grow food to feed people. Can you imagine such a thing? It's inconceivable as we look at our brothers and say, oh yeah, give him another big truck while he starves over there. Because corn and the price of corn is being pushed by, we think it's a better thing to grow food for cars because somehow it's better for the atmosphere. It's not true, and it doesn't make a difference. We're beginning to see impacts on the landscape. I'm sure you have, in your cedar zone, seen red flagging, where the red branchlets of the cedar trees die more frequently in larger amounts than they have in previous years. And eventually, cedar trees in dry sites die. Certainly happened on the east side of Vancouver, observed at the North Okanagan, where even in very dry years, 1998 was a dry year, where many trees that had become established and grew for 10, 15, 20 years died because it was so much drought that year. And this will continue. Our forests will change their composition and structure. We know about the pine beetle attack, another phenomenon that changed the ecology of a land size similar to that of a nation in Europe. And you go to the north and you'll see dead pine trees, gray sticks, way, way north, beyond where people had predicted at that time. Because it's like, again, you started this process that was driven by climate change and other factors, human factors, and it's like a train that just keeps going, and it doesn't stop until it finally does reach a limit, but far beyond what we thought it might be. Now we understand, we're now just not observing what's going on, we're beginning to understand how these things are connected and how they work. And one of the interesting ones is the jet stream. Let me bring you back to Arctic sea ice. We looked at the extent of Arctic sea ice up until recently. Then all of a sudden, the area plummets. You saw the picture. By 2012, it had plummeted basically off the scale from 11 million square kilometers to something in the order of 5 or 6, half its size. The importance of this is that generating cold air in the polar regions is very important for the global climate. Most warming takes place at the equator, that's where the energy comes. The warm air goes north, meets with the cold air that's being generated from the poles, which is influenced by how much sea ice you have, along the jet stream. That's where the storms happen, where the warm air cools, turns into water, which generates all our weather systems, which is our climate, particularly in our region. You change that interface between warm and cold because you're driving more warm from the south. You change the jet stream and you change the way it rains, how long it rains, how long it's sunny and warm. So here we go. Here's the jet stream idealized. See you going, cold air on the north side, warm air on the south. On the rising limbs of the jet stream, we have wet and stormy weather. On the dropping limbs of the jet stream, we have dry and settled weather. The problem is that the jet stream is slowing because the difference in energy and temperature between the north and south is less, the steepness of that gradient. And therefore, it doesn't move as quickly. So if you're on the uprise where it's warm and wet, it's warm and wet longer and you get floods. If you're on the downside, it's drier and clear longer and you love the weather as we had this summer. But somebody else is getting the rain. And if it gets dry and warm for too long, of course you have drought. And we had a drought in Victoria this year. And California is under an extreme drought. The jet stream is now moving more slowly and wobbling more. Where this is going to end, we don't know. But it absolutely begins to explain how big-time changes in the atmosphere and oceans are changing the weather you get right here in your valley. Just a summary, the sea ice decline may be slowing the jet stream, leading to longer transit time of air masses and weather systems, increased waviness, and more extreme weather. Both warm and cold and dry and wet because we're tinkering with the mechanics of the global system. In the Pliocene, and I study fossil plants, 2 to 5 million years ago, Arctic temperature was 34 degrees Fahrenheit. Oh, this was for an American audience. I apologize. Then today, at 390 parts per million. Forests grew on the north end of Ellesmere Island. At 390 parts per million, we are at 402. Sea levels at 1 to 2 degrees Celsius warmer stood 5 to 7 meters higher than today. That's where we're already committed to go. Not the one that everybody's conservatively talking about, but more than that. We have essentially passed the 1.5 Celsius warming limit now, unless we drastically and immediately limit our emissions of carbon dioxide, which I can guarantee you we will not. Something is going to happen, and it's going to happen really fast, and we have to adapt. One more sobering slide is if we look at the relationship between carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and temperature. For the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere we have today, our temperatures should be much warmer than they are. Which means it's going to get warmer, my friends. It's going to get warmer. There are thresholds. If we cross them, we really have major, major challenges. Let's not call them catastrophes, that's what everybody's called them. Let's just call them challenges because we are humans and we can adapt. We know how to live under different conditions. We crossed the Arctic summer sea ice one already. We are probably going to cross the melting of the Russian permafrost and the irreversible melting of the Greenland ice sheet, unless we do something very drastic, very quickly. So, that's what we face, folks. What does this mean about the future in terms of people run models? This is an extreme model. Why do I show you a model of extreme change? The reason is that in the future, if we don't look at the rapid changes that we may see in the future, we contemplate for something much less extreme. And if we do that, then we won't begin to prepare the way that we need to now. So major changes, some people say, both in rainfall, distribution, and in temperatures. And in British Columbia, we're looking at, by 2050, an increase of several degrees Celsius in our mean annual temperatures. We're looking at wetter winters and drier summers. So that's a simple thing to work. The winter's going to be wetter. We're going to deal with that extra water. How are we going to deal with the warmer and drier summers? Some good news out of this, we can grow a lot more because the growing season will be longer as long as we have water. So that the loss of agricultural activity in the south, in California, could be replaced by us growing more things and producing more of our own food and possibly for export to other places of the world. The impacts will take place on very large scales. This map just shows you on a continental scale how ecosystems can change. On one side, just look at that big greenish blob in the middle. That's the prairies. Look at the greenish blob in the future, way bigger. And in our own area, our ecosystem distribution and composition will change too. Here's a bunch of models for 2050 run for British Columbia in terms of vegetation. We go from the modern situation, what does this show you? For 2050, we're basically looking at a huge number of grassland and dry ecosystem types developing in British Columbia within 50 to 100 years. So these valley bottoms that have forests now, where you have big grassy, dry areas, those will expand. It'll be more like the southern Okanagan here than it is today. We know a little bit about what actually could happen. Those are projections. So those are people running models and dreaming and thinking about things. What about what actually happened? I study the fossil record. You could look at what happened in the past, and there was a time when it was a little bit warmer and drier. 7,000 or 8,000 years ago, which isn't very long ago. And in fact, it's just a few lifetimes of our ancient lived trees, like Douglas firs, which could live to be 1,500 years old. Not so long ago, really. So we look at pollen grains and plant debris from the bottom of a lake. This happens to be a lake that was dug out, or from cores taken from the bottom of a lake that go back thousands of years. We know that 9,000 years ago, on the coast and in the interior, open landscape, prairies were widespread, including here. We did some work at Little Slocan Lake. We know that 9,000 years ago, the landscape was very open. It was warmer than today, drier than today, maybe a degree or so, and prairies predominate. That's a beautiful campus there. I'll talk about that in a moment. We know the tree lines were higher. We've looked at ecosystems at higher elevations over thousands of years, and we know that trees grew at higher elevations. We knew that wetlands were different, where we have bogs, where we had marshes like these, especially on the coast. So aquatic systems change. So water supply and quality changes. We know there were more fires. Many more fires burned. Just longer, warmer, drier summers. Lightning, they burn bigger and further. We know that the landscapes looked different. They weren't like this, forested and beautiful. This is near Kamloops. That site would have looked more like this 9,000 years ago, where the valley bottoms were not covered by trees, but they were covered by prairies or grasslands. So we have to prepare for these changes because we know this can happen. And if we take a look at what the distribution of ecosystems looked at that time, just compare what it's like 3,000 over here on the right. Today, look at the yellow. Yellow is grasslands. Look at the yellow as it was 9,000 years ago. Whole interior of British Columbia was a grassland. Look on the coast. Very little brown, that's coastal Douglas fir forest. Huge area of brown, that's the warm, dry forest. Look at your region there. There wasn't any of the interior cedar hemlock forest which grows on the slopes all around here at that time, because the conditions were not suitable, probably. We don't know for sure, but probably. So the world is different when the climate changes, and we know how it is different because of the fossil record. We also know, we looked at some tree rings that we found in the bottom of the lake. We took the tree rings, cut them, the trees preserved, they were pickled in the mud of the lake. And they lived over thousands of years, and they fell, and they died, and they were pickled. But you could take them all and match their tree rings. Now we found that, there it is. We found that about 3,850 years ago, there was a dramatic change in the growth of trees and in climate. That's the last time the global climate shifted. And it shifted just a little bit, but it happened in less than 10 years. So change may happen very quickly, not gradually. So what are we going to do with this? We've got to go on a diet, folks. A carbon diet in two ways. We have to stop consuming fossil fuels or any other kind of carbon for fuel. There's a fallacy out there that if we have it green fuel as opposed to black fuel, it's better. It's the amount of carbon that goes into the atmosphere, not its source, that matters. If it's black fuel, fossil fuel, it's still a carbon dioxide molecule doing something. If it's green fuel and it goes into the atmosphere, it's still a carbon dioxide molecule going into the atmosphere doing something. It's the number of them going up that we have to stop. So we have to go on a diet. Use less energy that emits carbon dioxide, and do less of stuff that releases carbon dioxide or methane or other things. But the other thing I want to talk about is the destruction of natural ecosystems and the degradation of them. We have to stop eating our land, our resources, our forests. They are our allies. If they had a vote, they wouldn't be voting like we do. Or some of us. So let's talk about what that means. We reduce emissions. It's not that difficult, actually, to live in a world with fewer emissions. Here's a simple chart. Coal. You get gigatons of carbon dioxide, lots of carbon emitted to use coal per kilowatt hour. There it is, 1,001, whatever that is. If you use hydroelectric reservoir, it only takes 4 amounts. It only reduces 4 amounts of carbon dioxide. Even natural gas is half as bad as coal. So even if we're going to stick with some fossil fuels, changing to different fossil fuels makes a huge difference. But not using them at all makes a massive difference. Can you do it? Absolutely. This is what's going on in terms of using photovoltaic. Solar energy, basically. The amount of solar energy being used to generate energy has dramatically increased. Not so much in North America, but hugely in Europe. They're doing it, they've done it, and they continue to do it. There's a good place to look for how to live a different way and reduce CO2 emissions. And now, adapt. It's up to you. I give this talk to various groups, even the Ministry of Finance in the province of British Columbia, if you can imagine. They asked me, I've got to talk to them. And I say, you know, and to community groups and to environmental organizations. And people say, whoa, we've got to get the government to do something. Or, it's that damned industry, they're responsible. Well, sure, there's a way of thinking that's involved in there that doesn't help. But you know what? I turn the key of my car. Not Christy Clark. Not Stephen Harper. I do. I buy food that I didn't grow. I did. I take trips maybe that I don't need to. I did. So the responsibility is here. Yes, we need the powers that be, all of them, to enable and maybe even to encourage various ways through taxes, etc., less consumption or less emission of CO2, but still the decision is often in our hands. And therefore, it's in the community where the best action can take place. We can show them. So it's up to you. Adaptation. This was Vulnerability to climate change, greenhouse gas emissions, and the capacity for adaptation and mitigation are strongly influenced by our livelihoods, our lifestyles, behavior, and culture. That means it's us. Yes, the profit motive is a very difficult one to deal with, but nevertheless, we emit the carbon dioxide. What can we do? Respect water. We all need it. There's a lot of it in us, and it has a huge role on the landscape. Here it is somewhere in the interior. I don't remember whether I took this picture. I've been around too long. I remember whether I do lots of things, but there's the power of water, and that's just the water on the surface, because under that is a huge body of water moving along that same valley at a slower rate. Know your hydrological cycle. How does the water, where does it come from? How does it cycle through the atmosphere? And what are the things that influence it here? And just a quick lesson. Yes, it evaporates in lakes and oceans, forms a cloud. I know that. I tried to land here. It took half an hour. And then it falls down to the ground and goes back there through the ground on the surface. But you know what? Vegetation plays an incredibly important role in mediating what happens to that water. It influences where that water goes. A lot of water goes back into the atmosphere, not into the ground. If the ground is porous and there's lots of roots in here, that water gets slowed down, stored, and then moves slowly through the ground, into the streams, through the summer, provides habitat for fish, gives you water that you could use to water your garden, reduces floods and landslides. If we would only understand the simplicity of the hydrological cycle and keep the trees and keep cover on the land. Don't do this kind of things. Whoops. Yeah, keep the trees. The healthy forest floor is a sponge, absorbs and releases water slowly, prevents flooding and erosion. Compact soils or paved landscapes or too many roofs release the water quickly into the streams. They flood, they cause damage, they cause erosion. And then it's dry when there's no water because you didn't store it into the ground. Trees have a vital role in this by intercepting and evaporating, by collecting water in the roots and sending them back into the atmosphere. Every tree matters as far as hydrology goes. Bad idea. This is the government law, by the way, by the legislature. I parked there. I'm sorry. I am a carbaholic. I consume carbon. Water gardens. Finding ways to maintain detention storage. Keeping your lakes healthy. Not destroying wetlands. Not straightening streams. Letting nature design the way water leaves the landscape. That's the way to help and understand water. And of course, don't clear cut lawn. You all know about watering up. You know why it happens. It's hydrology. Why do it? If you can do it in another way, that won't have the same consequences. Then we deal with water, we're going to deal with nature now. Foster nature. Because in nature is part of the global system. The living skin on the earth is part of the atmosphere, part of the hydrosphere, part of the physical structure of the land. Okay, how much time do I have? 10 minutes, excellent. So, by fostering nature and keeping it healthy, you build resilience, resistance to risk, to rapid changes, and it helps reduce the consequences of climate change. The most beautiful forests, for various kinds of reasons, are old forests. You know, now I'm on the, let's say, sunny side of 60. Old is good, I realize. I never realized that so much when I was 18 or 21 and argued with my father. But there is power in age, especially in older ecosystems. They hold huge amounts of carbon in the living biomass, in the dead material on the floor, and in the soil. The older forests with lots of carbon contain more biological diversity, more diversity of life. And that network of life is what we need to make sure that global living systems don't start rapidly changing. So every tree matters. Growing. Why? Because one way guaranteed to take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere is Photosynthesis, remember that word, remember nothing else. Photosynthesis. Take the carbon out, turn it into a tree, or a shrub, or a berry, or a bean. Let it accumulate on the land and come out of the atmosphere. Don't cut it down, because when you cut it down, it begins to decompose through respiration and release carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. 20% of the problem in the atmosphere is because of deforestation and the inappropriate treatment of our living green kinfolk. 250-year-old Douglas fir forest is the optimum carbon storage in a natural ecosystem. Similarly, your old-growth forests here will have the same role. Go native. Start restoring natural ecosystems. Plant native species. Rebuild that network, that framework, that blanket, that living thing that holds together the surface of the earth that nurtures us. Don't tear it down. Rebuild it or keep it. The Kootenai Wild Initiative, if I've gotten the name around here, there's an initiative here to understand and foster native ecosystems in this region. Learn about it and work with them. On the coast, we have a wonderful book. It took us about 10 years to put all the knowledge about restoring and building ecosystems in one place. Management and restoration guides like this one. Big, big thing. It tells you all sorts of things about the ecosystem and how you can do things to keep it together and to bring it back. Here we have a handbook for gardeners in the city of Victoria so that they bring back this rare ecosystem and all its rare species, or keep it if they have it. What can you do in your garden, on your property, in your local community to maintain the living fabric of biological diversity and our green kinfolk healthy? Plant native species. Here's Nootka rose. You have many roses that are wonderful as plants, as road-sized plants, and you can eat some of them. Thimbleberry is another one. I don't have a lot of plants from here, but I'll give you some examples that grow along here. You can encourage this along your roadsides and have it grow. Camas, which I've told you about, part of the Kootenai Wild Initiative, a wonderful bulb to grow in your own gardens, which, by the way, you can eat the bulbs if you don't know that. Stone crop. There should be no bare rocks anywhere around here. They should be covered in lichens and mosses and stone crops. Another thing here that's going on is assisted migration adaptation trial. Big word, but basically they're trying different species or different genetic stocks of forest trees in different parts of British Columbia and Western North America. So things that grow in the south, they're trying further north to see whether they're suitable or adapted for growing there now or potentially in the future. So we're beginning to move things, but not move anything higgledy-piggledy, very thoughtfully. Here's some trial plots in Vernon. Get rid of the aliens. Nail knapweed. We know, look at this, Western Canada, total losses from knapweed, $58 million, right? Don't bring them in, and if you've got them around, get rid of them, because they degrade natural ecosystems. Take them over. Preventing the spread of exotic species preserves British Columbia's natural history and our natural legacy, because once you get them in there, it's difficult to get them out, and they cause problems. So there's another thing you can do. Conserve and build soil. Soil is one of the most remarkable things, this living combination of physical and plants and animals, holding the earth together, driving the plant communities and our food. And grow local. Don't bring stuff from somewhere far away if you don't need to, and you can grow it here. And beans. We bring beans in from California in the summertime. What a lunacy. I can grow more beans than you can possibly imagine. I brought you some beans to share. These are heritage beans. These are Jico black beans from a little village in Mexico. Very good for soup. These are Monteverde market beans from Costa Rica, which I will be willing to share with people who want to try them. And these are the most meaningful ones to me. These come from my cousins, still living in their family village in the Tatra Mountains. Each one of them, if you look at it, has a little red eagle. It's a bush bean, and it's a dry bean for eating. But it was grown as a protest against the communist government, because the fools had no idea that on every bean was the very proud image of the Polish eagle. And as they grew the beans, they were sticking the big proverbial finger in the face of the guys who had no idea, because they probably never grew a damn thing in their life. They just ran the government corporations. I have a few of those to share as well. Grow a bean and grow the bean and join the one bean revolution. And here we see why. If we don't do anything about changing the way we grow to grow food sustainably, we're going to have very, very serious food issues. This is the consequences of not adapting and changing the way we grow our food. Shortages, problems, diseases, this is the positive benefit on the plus side of food yields if we do it right. I will not talk much about it, but we can talk about it. We have a framework about food stability and sustainability. I want to tell you just quickly about a project we have. It's called Gardener Scientists Helping to Prepare for Climate Change. We are trying different heritage varieties in different places around the world. So, not the world, I'm taking over the world. In Canada. And I would like to know if any of you grow heritage potatoes or heritage beans, and let me know so that we can bring them into this program. And we essentially observe the climate in which they grow and how the variety does. And we had some grown here in Winlaw. Gail Elder and his wife grew them for us. And we record their successes and failures to see what varieties are best for which place. So we measure the temperature and relative humidity, and we grow different varieties. And here's a variety of which I have a few to share. The Ozette potato, which was preserved by First Nations, apparently given by the Spanish to First Nations 200 years ago. They just grew them out there somewhere on the west coast, and we finally got them back from those communities. They were passed to me, and it's the best yielding potato one can imagine for the west coast. Who knew about it? This totally, nearly lost heritage potato came to us a very different way.
And here's the yield.
You can see there's the yield Winlaw last year, massive yields of the Ozette Nootka potato compared to other varieties. HeritagePotato.ca, we even have a website, very modern technologically. Final message. It's time we learn to live like the hobbits. I love the hobbits. Some of you may not know what hobbits are, but they're about this high and furry. They like to sing and dance, have beautiful choirs, drink and eat, and live peacefully. Enjoy traditions, and live in the land, not on the land. And someday maybe we will live like this, where we won't see us all over the place converting everything in our own purpose, but in a way that's much more sustainable. The way forward is through community action. Forget about those guys in Ottawa and Victoria. Well, don't forget about them, but get them, talk to them as people and get them to think like you. Maybe they will make different decisions, but make the decisions in your own lives, and I know that you will, and I know that you can, because I heard it, I saw it from this morning. Things are changing, we have to do something. And that preparation means adaptation. I hope I've given you some ideas about how to do it, and I would just like to thank a few people. Thank you very much for having me come here.
Sure. Yeah.